Well, hello everyone. Greetings. It is Saturday, January 22nd of 2022. If you're joining me in January of 2022, welcome back. If you're watching this video in some later year or decade, you have my sympathies for what you're going through. I'm really sorry. The purpose of this video and this series of videos, The Age of Chaos, is something of an apology and maybe something of an explanation as to why we did the things we did and allowed things to get as bad off as we did. There really is no excuse, not really. We screwed up, and at least I'm going to try to explain why we screwed up. Maybe some of the chaos that comes after will make more sense based on some of this context. So let's do this. I want to talk today about something I call a class of problems called technology traps. And I was just trying to remember where I first came across that concept. It's been in my thought patterns for at least 30 years, maybe longer. And I don't know if I got it from a book, title of a book maybe, or an article someone wrote. We barely had the internet back then. So a magazine article, I don't know. But it stuck with me. Maybe I made it up myself, but it stuck with me. There's a great deal of context about what people do and the things that they don't allow themselves to do and the things that they refuse to contemplate doing, because we exist in a highly technological world. It was true in the 80s and the 90s. It's certainly true today. And people are basically aware. They're aware on an emotional level, maybe not an intellectual level, but they're aware on an emotional level that they are trapped. They're in a bad place. They're in a place where you as an essayist or as a politician or as a cultural leader, you can't go. You can't go there. You can't lead them from there because they are in a difficult place. Read an article recently where research into human behavior suggests an interesting observation, which is that people are far more likely to cling to what they have, to deal with the risks they have that they know, than to deal with anything that's unknown, even if it's better. Even if it's better, it's the drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood that's being swept out to sea, while the shore is, a swimmable distance away, and it refuses to let go because something bad could happen on the way to shore if you're swimming, and I can hold on to this, and this will at least give me some sense of salvation. Not that it will save me, but I can cling to it and gain comfort from it. Just clinging to the thing I have and not risking a better outcome. And this has been shown time and time again. That's how people are. And you can certainly see where that could even be an evolved characteristic, that people cling to things. They won't, if they release it, they may not get something back at all. Or if they release something familiar, the thing they get back may be unfamiliar and they can't use it, can't eat it, can't wear it, can't live there, So they tend to cling to things, even though those things may be toxic, dangerous, even lethal. Okay. So when it came time for humanity to start dealing with climate change, and realistically, the conversation about this started in the late 1800s, but it became a real thing once science began to notice what was happening in the world in the 60s. So we kind of knew. It was a small circle of people, but that doesn't matter. That's how That's how any knowledge or comprehension begins. It's with a small group of people. Small group of people knew. And in late 80s, it was getting urgent enough that government agencies like NASA and some of their departments were starting to approach the government and say, listen, Congress, you need to start wrapping your head around this. So in the late 80s, let's call it 1990 for round figures, everybody kind of had agreed that, yeah, this is real. It's no longer, the knowledge is no longer limited to a small circle of people. It's generally acknowledged, and it's been studied a lot. So we kind of have a handle on this. We kind of don't know what the future holds. We don't have enough information, but we do have enough information in, say, 1990 to start pointing to problems that require a solution. And as we know now, in the year 2022, and as later peoples will understand with greater clarity and urgency in later years, we will know, you will know better than I. You will know better than I after the year 2022 that we did nothing. We just didn't. So I want to address that. Doing something is the scary thing. It's letting go of the thing that you're clinging to and venturing into something maybe, well, certainly unknown. How are you going to live without fossil fuels? I don't know. I mean, you can. People lived without fossil fuels for a long time before that was the way you did things. So let's not say we can't. Of course we can. We got 200,000 years of living without fossil fuels. But from where you are now, in your comfortable suburb with your comfortable couch and your comfortable 72-inch TV and your comfortable, 1.8 children or whatever it is, you can't see that. So we didn't do anything. We sat on this for, well, as of now, I guess it's been 30 years, but more like 50 or 60 years, really, when the scientific community started to circle around this. Why? Okay, my thesis is that people are trapped. They're trapped, and the trap is real. This is not a metaphor. It doesn't have to be a steel jaw trap like you trap a bear with or a wolf. There are lots of traps, and this is a trap. It's very real. It has real implications for people when you're trapped. If you're walking and you in the forest and you fall into a pit and you break your leg, you're trapped. That has real implications. You can't get out. And any situation where you are essentially crippled and can't get out, you're trapped. It doesn't matter whether it's a hole in the ground or a home in the suburbs. You're trapped, and you're going to know it. And when people come along and say, "Well, we have to start changing things," you're going to look at the walls of your trap, and you're going to say, "Okay, but you can't do that. You can't change those things. I can't do without those things. I have to have those things." And sometimes it's narcissism. Sometimes it's selfishness. I have to have my 72-inch TV. I can't have a 60-inch TV. It's got to be 72. And I'm looking for an 80-inch TV. And blah blah blah. I can't do without a car. And I'm trying to buy a luxury car. I need a luxury SUV. I need more airbags. Some of it's narcissism and greed and selfishness, which is a kind of emotional trap that you can't imagine not having bigger and better things. It would just spiral you into soul-crushing depression if you didn't have a 96-inch TV, okay? There's that kind of trap. But then there's real traps. You live in the suburbs, the kids' schools. One of the kids go to a school 3 miles in that direction. Another kid goes to school 5 miles in that direction. And you work at your job 26 miles in a third direction. And the place where you shop is 6 miles the other direction. And every day, that's your life. So how are you going to survive without a car? And maybe an electric car, an EV is in your future. Maybe it's not. But that also is a technological trap, which I'm going to get into here shortly. So I have some notes so I don't ramble quite so much on this video. Just a couple of framing notes, essentially, just setting the stage here. So most people don't actually see technology. Now, that wasn't always the case, by the way. There was a time when there was so little technology in their lives, and it was so primitive that people kind of had something of a personal relationship with it. If you wanted music, you had to buy vinyl records. You had to take care of them. You had to clean them. You had to put them on the thing. Thing had to go around. You put the needle down, and you got to listen to your music. And people collected LPs, and they stored them, and they knew where they were, and they knew that if it got a crack in it or a scratch, it wouldn't work. And they had to manage that technology to have recorded music. Radios were primitive. There were vacuum tubes that had to be replaced periodically, and you had to do the dial thing to get the station and adjust this other thing. What is this?
Oh no, Sarah wanted me to record it for you. Anyway, that's what I just.
What is this?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Anyway, wife is doing something here. I'm not sure what. So when primitive technology was the norm, and there wasn't very much of it, people could have a relationship with it. They could manage it. There wasn't very much of it. It was pretty primitive. You had to know what you were doing, and most of it wasn't even critical infrastructure. Now, radios were very important, and the household had a radio. The household probably had electricity to run the radio, but a lot of radios were battery radios. What is it?
I'm hearing a buzz.
Well, that's not my problem. Are you on the YouTube channel?
I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing a buzz.
On the YouTube channel?
Huh?
On the YouTube channel?
Yeah. What? Have you checked your audio stuff? Yeah, I am. I'm listening. Anyway, I just heard a buzz.
Are you hearing a buzz now?
Yes.
Are you listening on YouTube?
No, I'm listening to you.
Are you hearing a buzz?
I'm listening.
Are you hearing a buzz?
Yeah. I'm
talking to you. Who are you listening to?
Now I'm not hearing it. No, now I'm not. Now I'm not.
Okay. Well, I don't know what that was about, but that wasn't worth it. So, technical issues. I don't know what she was doing. She was recording me onto Facebook or something, so I don't know what that was about. Technology. These days, our technology is far more ubiquitous than just having one battery-powered radio and one Victrola in the family room, right? Let's see if I can do a quick count of how many computers I have in my house. One I'm using right now. My wife has another one. That's 2. I have 2 internet routers and a AT&T router. That's 5. I have my cell phone. That's 6. She has a cell phone. That's 7. I have another laptop computer, and we have a second laptop up here. That's 8, 9, and that's just the computers. That's just the computers. Then there's all the peripherals, printers, this USB camera, all this stuff. I've got security cameras. I have a security system right now with 5 cameras, and there's Category 5 Ethernet wires that connect all those things back to the box, the recorder, the video recorder, and so on. Oh, the doors. The doors, the part you turn, the doors are all keyless entry with biometrics, fingerprints. They connect to the internet, and they are connectable via Bluetooth. My refrigerator has computer chips in it. I have a heat pump water heater that has a computer in it and a network connection. I have rooftop solar. I have my own solar installation with batteries. It's massive. It runs the entire property. I'm basically the electric company. So that's the level of technology that I have just in this property. And that's not even an exhaustive list. I could spend a half an hour, and I'd probably have 50 or 60 things that I know of. Wouldn't probably even include the chip technology in the Instapot, the microwave oven, the countertop toaster oven, the range, the induction cooktop range in the kitchen. It just goes on and on and on. How does induction cooktop even work? Why does it take certain types of pans to cook food and others won't work at all? So there is so much technology, and it is so invisible, and it is so push button, and it is so disposable. When it breaks, we just throw it away. We don't even think about it anymore. It's completely invisible to us, by and large. Now, it's not invisible to me. I'm a technologist, and I'm old enough to have kind of grown up with this stuff. So I saw it in its early days and studied it in its early days. And I've seen the evolution, and I've seen more layers of abstraction and user interfaces wrap around what used to be really primitive technology. But I know what the core, the kernel is still there. 8-bit computers, 4-bit microcontrollers, servos, transformers, power supplies. I know all that stuff. I built computers for my personal use. I build networks for my personal use. I can set up a wireless network. I don't need to have a service technician or anything. I know how these things work, but that's because I'm older and I grew up with this stuff. For people coming into it now, as young people, or really even grandmas who didn't grow up with it, literally the way I did, it's invisible. It's just invisible. You don't even know it's there. This is a real problem right now. This is a very serious problem. I'm going to explain why when I get back on track here. Now, the key here is that you can now get deep reliant on technology and not understand how it works. You don't have to understand, for example, Maxwell's equations of electromagnetism to use a cell phone. There's a little thing that says how many bars do you have. You know if your signal is strong enough or if it's not. And if it can't do 5G, it'll do 4G. And if it can't do 4G, it'll do 3G. And it figures all this stuff out for you. Okay? So nevertheless, you are reliant on a cell tower to make that work. There are lots of people who would take their cell phone, go up in the mountains, go camping, and find out they don't have a signal. Oh, now what do I do? Yeah, good question. You might have a medical emergency. Are the paramedics going to come if you can't even call them? Would they even be able to find you if you have a medical emergency? What if you're diabetic? What if you didn't bring your insulin? What are you going to do? You're in a bad place at that point. This is by way of another way to say that humans no longer live in a natural habitat. We do not. We did at one time live in natural habitat, and you say, well, that's Stone Age people, that's Iron Age people. It's true. It's true. Let's not say they didn't have technology. A pointed stick is a pretty formidable piece of technology in the right hands. Stone tools, fire, these are major technological innovations. I mean, seriously, major. We wouldn't have cell phones today if we hadn't domesticated fire. It just wouldn't have happened. But people in those early days, just like when we had early days of radio and TV, people's relationship with their technology was very personal. They knew how it worked. And they could live in a natural habitat with this really primitive technology, and they'd be fine. They were fine. There's even some evidence that hunter-gatherers didn't work very hard, and they had lives of leisure. That's why they could sit around and make stone tools and sit around and sharpen sticks and invent language and oral histories because they had time. They had a lot of time. Later on, when people's technologies became more and more increasingly complicated and required more personal attention and was more complex, which is not quite the same thing as complicated. As complexity exploded in these post-hunter-gatherer civilizations, they found themselves having less and less natural habitat. Their reliance on their technology increased more and more. And today, as that trajectory has played itself out, there is essentially no natural habitat left for humans. We've tilled everything up. We've domesticated all the animals. We've destroyed the animals that couldn't be domesticated. We've spread ourselves over the entire planet. Basically, every square foot of land that can be tilled or used for farming or used for cities or used for freeways is in use. There's really nothing left. There's nowhere to spread to anymore. If you could spread there, people would have done so by now. And so if we're not living in natural habitat, what are we living in? Well, we're living in an artificial habitat. We live in an artificial habitat. And this is key to understanding the technological trap. You live in an artificial habitat. It is constructed of inventions, innovation, networking, communications, just-in-time manufacturing, just-in-time food delivery, all this stuff. It's completely artificial, 100% artificial. It didn't exist on this earth before we invented it. No one lived this way until we lived this way. People in the past would have looked at our way of living, and this would have been tantamount to magic to them. And as I often tell my wife, everyone who lives in a modern American city, and I don't care who they are, how far they have fallen, how bad their situation is, everybody, pretty much, virtually everybody lives like a king. And I don't mean that they wear a crown and have lots of golds and jewels and they wear ermine. What I mean is they have access to solutions that the king of ancient empires would have thought magical. That the king wouldn't have eaten as well as we can eat. You can take your EBT card and go down to Mickey D's or a pizza parlor and get food that is so well assembled, it has so many ingredients, and is so luscious, so hot, so ready to eat that a king of old would have thought that was an amazing thing. And you can just swipe your benefits card and you walk out with it. You don't even need a staff of servants and a whole army of serfs working for you to have that. You just go into the fast food place and swipe your card and walk out with a meal that's almost impossible to imagine until recently. So we all live that way. And we have no recourse. There's no place for us to go. Now, I know that people, what do they call them? Survivalists, urban survivalists, whatever. They all have plans that they'll bug out. They'll go live in the mountains if there's an earthquake, or if there's a zombie apocalypse, they'll go live in the desert, or all these kinds of things. But if you look at their plans, they've got 10,000 rounds of ammunition. They've got 6 guns. They've got a 4-wheel drive vehicle with a tank of gas, and they got jerry cans full of gas. And they built a bunker out of concrete, and they have a road that they made with a tractor, and they're going to go up here, and then they're going to, they have seeds, and they're going to plant seeds, and they're going to have 10,000 rations of MREs and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, that's still artificial habitat. You're just surrounding yourself with something that you think is a little more resilient than what you're leaving behind, but you're still bringing with you your artificial human habitat in like a little capsule. So you're like an astronaut. You're like an astronaut. You're going to flee the city. You're going to flee the urban environment or the suburban environment. And you're going to go up in the hills and you're going to live how? Well, you're going to take all your technology with you, including, I suppose, your television set and some sort of a gas-powered generator to operate all this stuff, right? I don't know. Well, we don't have natural habitat. There are very few people, very few. And there's so few that they're remarkable who can survive without all this technology. And even then, I mean, realistically, not even then. Seriously, nobody really leaves the grid. Nobody leaves behind technology. Nobody leaves behind steel and ammunition and their basic understanding of the tools of survival. They're not making stone tools. They're not even sharpening a stick necessarily. They think they've got it all figured out. Maybe they do. Maybe that works for them. But for the rest of us, we're trapped. We can't take enough artificial habitat with us into the wilderness to survive for very long. Maybe a year, right? But will you survive for 50 years or 100 years, which is what, the global heating crisis is. This is a 100-year project. If we're lucky, it could be a 1,000-year project. By project, I mean the project of surviving and adapting to a changing climate, to a changing world. It could easily be 1,000 years. Nobody really knows. And so since nobody really knows and nobody can know, we just have to accept that that's a possibility. Stack on top of that the fact that we have rendered unnatural most of the planet. I was saying recently on a different podcast as a comment that where they're talking about natural habitat and restoring natural habitat. I'm a biologist, so I have some data on these issues, and I said there's no natural habitat. There's no untouched habitat on this planet. You can say that. You can say, well, here's a pristine forest over here. We're going to preserve that. Here's a pristine wetland. There's no such thing. There really isn't. There's mercury contamination in Alaska, in so-called pristine Alaskan lakes up on the top of the mountains in Alaska. Pristine lakes. There's mercury contamination, methyl mercury contamination from burning coal in China. And you go to your mangrove swamp that's supposedly completely pristine, and you're going to find pesticides, herbicides, plastics. There's no place on this planet that's natural anymore. That's not good for the animals, clearly, but it wouldn't be good for us either. You can't go to it. When settlers arrived on the east coast of the North America, from Connecticut to the West Coast was all prairie. And the few people that lived there, Native Americans, they were no real threat. They were Stone Age people. So that, nothing but room to grow, manifest destiny, that whole thing. Well, now you go to the Midwest, it's all gone. It's all been tilled under. And the practices that have been established over all of this former pristine grassland, those established practices require a certain level of technology. And if we can't deliver that technology, we're seriously screwed. It's just not the same as it was. This is not natural habitat. We can't go there a second time and say, let's start over. It requires a certain level of technology. We have built a fragile system, layer upon layer upon layer. Like my last analysis was, building a house of cards, one card at a time, one compromise, one innovation, one new technique, one destruction of a habitat at a time. We built this house of cards, and as soon as any part of that doesn't work anymore, the whole thing falls down. And you don't have an alternative after that. You can't go back and say, well, we'll just start over. No, you can't. You've destroyed it, except for the purpose to which you are applying to it now. And if that doesn't work anymore for some reason, like, for example, I don't know, maybe someone turns off the fossil fuels, or they become real expensive, or they become hard to get, those kind of changes, then that situation that we created, that artificial situation dependent upon the technologies that we have invented and perfected and imposed, that situation becomes unsustainable, to put it mildly. It could just collapse completely. So let me just make a couple of points here about how we end up in a technology trap. And these will all apply to people in 2022. They may not apply quite so much to people in 2025 or 2030. Don't know what the future holds for future generations. If you're watching this later on, you know how this played out. But right now, the situation is that we have a problem that we can't solve. We have a problem that we can't solve. And it's not even fair to call it a problem. If you have a problem that you can't solve, it's not actually a problem anymore. There's actually a different word you have to use. A problem that you can't solve is not called a problem. It's called a predicament. You have a predicament. If you have a problem, then there's probably a solution. Just find the solution, apply the solution, and problem solved. That's how people tend to think. But if you have a set of problems that you can't solve, your house of cards is built out of cards that cannot be removed and cannot be replaced once they're in position, then you don't have a problem anymore. You have a predicament, okay? And that's the key to this thing. One of my analogies is of a predicament is this. The tiger. So tigers are very capable. They're solitary predators. They can easily feed themselves. They don't require a pack of tigers, tiger agreements, tiger treaties. They just need to have a territory that they can hunt in, and they have enough claws and teeth and strength and aggression that they can feed themselves and they're fine. Tiger in the zoo has a different predicament. The tiger in the zoo can't do for itself. It can't. It just can't. How does the tiger survive in the zoo? Well, the tiger requires every single day for a human who has been hired, paid for the purpose to come and deliver them food, wash away the waste products that have accumulated in their grotto, make sure they have fresh water, protect them from other humans, right? Tigers are quite valuable. Tiger skin, tiger penis, tiger teeth, really valuable. So they have to protect the tigers from the humans because the tiger's in a trap. And it would be very easy to kill the tiger and strip it of its useful parts. So the tiger has to be protected by humans who understand the importance of that. The tiger, because it's in an artificial habitat, maybe it gets sick. Maybe it needs special vitamins to eat. Maybe it needs vaccinations against viruses and things from other animals in the same zoo. Who knows what the tiger has to have? Now, for the tiger, this is not a problem because the tiger has no solution. For the tiger, this is a predicament. The tiger is in a predicament. The tiger can't solve its problem. There is no solution. Now, the tiger could get out of its particular artificial habitat, but then it simply finds itself in a larger artificial habitat, the larger zoo or the zoo that is located in a city. So the city. The tiger would have to endure an incredible gauntlet of challenges and additional predicaments for it to finally extricate itself from its predicament, which is it's completely embedded in artificial habitat. This is a really useful example because almost certainly everybody listening to this video, certainly in the year 2022, maybe less so in future years, but absolutely right now, as I'm recording this, every single person listening to this video is in a trap. You're in a trap. It's a technological trap. It manifests itself in things like where's your food coming from, where's your water coming from, where's your medication coming from, who's protecting you. You can't do these things for yourself. You can't. You think you can. Probably more likely, you never think about it at all. Just like the tiger doesn't think about it. The food shows up, the tiger eats. The excrement collects in a corner, and then the excrement is gone. Someone came in with a hose and cleaned it out. The tiger doesn't care. It just went away. Every time you flush the toilet, what? Okay, fine. Goodbye. I'm being mothered. And you're like that. You're like that. You don't know you're like that. And the tiger doesn't even know it's like that. The tiger doesn't have a thought like, well, I'm in a trap. I'm in a predicament. What am I going to do if these people don't come every day and bring the food and bring the water and wash away the excrement and keep the poachers away and bring me my medicine when I'm sick? And the tiger doesn't have those thoughts. And you don't either. You don't either. You don't have those thoughts. What's going to happen when it doesn't work anymore? Now, for a tiger sitting in a cage, if that situation doesn't work for it anymore, it probably just dies. It just starves to death. Maybe it tries to get out finally. Maybe at some point it'll actually try to climb out of the grotto and take the effort to do that, and maybe it'll be successful. Tigers are very powerful. They don't generally try to get out of their grotto. They had one in San Francisco that did exactly that. I think it just clawed its way out because some boys, towards the end of the day, when people weren't really watching, some boys were teasing the tiger or the lion, whatever it was, teasing the animal. And it just got angry and it clawed its way out. And I'm pretty sure it killed one of them and injured the other. And maybe they both died eventually. I don't know. But you can imagine an angry tiger. It was just murdering people. So maybe a tiger can eventually get itself out of its grotto. But then it's a loose tiger. And of course, it's going to have a problem if people find it. But what about you? How are you going to claw your way out of your predicament? Can you even do that? Are you strong enough to do that? A tiger is self-equipped. It's got the teeth. It's got the claws. It's got the musculature. It's got the aggression. Do you? Can you do that? What's going to happen if someone stops bringing you water, stops bringing you food, stops bringing you, and you say, well, they don't bring me this stuff. I go to the market. Well, someone brought it to the market. An 18-wheeler pulls up every 2 a.m. to the unloading dock, disgorges all this, prepared foods, canned foods, or maybe the butcher truck delivers all this meat, or produce truck delivers all this produce, and that's for you. And then you walk down the 2 blocks or the 2 miles or whatever it is, and you buy the food that someone brought for you. And so it works, and that's really not a lot different than someone bringing it to your home. You didn't produce it. You don't know where it was produced. It all shows up by magic. And you don't think of this as a problem, but this is absolutely a problem. Just as that the tiger doesn't know where its food comes from, that's a problem for the tiger. That is absolutely a problem. Well, it would be a problem if there was a solution. It's a predicament. The tiger has no control over that. Neither do you. You are in a technological trap. You are. The technology to produce your food, deliver your food, refrigerate your food, sell you the food with a credit card swipe or whatever's required, all that has been constructed for you, one card at a time in the house of cards, which we call the food supply. If that ever collapses, or even gets shaky, or even just becomes a little bit dicey, empty shelves, suddenly hoarding, suddenly riots, it's consequential, right? Big consequences. So let me run through some examples of technological traps, and I'll try and illuminate some of these. But I think simply with the context I've just given, that these things tend to be invisible. We have very personal dependencies. We have shared dependencies as communities. We can only have communities because of artificial habitat that we've created over the centuries. These kinds of things. Now, when I give you a list, just to give you an idea of how bad your situation is, or how bad the situation was in 2022, some of this is trying to explain why we in 2022 didn't make the changes that obviously needed to be done. Somebody in 2032 will have a different story. Did they make the changes? Were they still not able to make the changes? Are they still car dependent and insulin dependent and food dependent and all this kind of stuff? Don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. But I can tell you today, 2022, we are in a very serious predicament. And remember, the definition of a predicament is something that really there is no solution. And all your techno-utopian, well, there's always a solution. We'll innovate, we'll share better, we'll spread the wealth and all this kind of stuff. I don't think so. I don't think that's happening. I don't see any signs of that happening, and I don't think that it can even be done. Anyway, so here's the list. Car dependency. I gave that example at the outset of, 3 miles to that school, 2 miles to that school, 5 miles to shopping, and 26 miles to your place of work, and you're stuck in a car 5 hours a day, right? Well, you're not just stuck in a car and anything that goes along with being stuck in a car. You're dependent on a car. Now that means, and people who live in suburbs will admit to this probably if they sit down and think about it, you're dependent on a whole infrastructure, a fragile, brittle infrastructure that supports cars. What is that infrastructure? Well, the roads, right? They need maintenance all the time. They need to be built, and then they need to be maintained. Bridges, same problem. You're driving over a bridge, you're driving over an overpass. It has to be inspected, maintained, replaced as necessary. And then there's the entire infrastructure for fuel delivery to your neighborhood or electricity delivery to your charging station. And you have no control over those two things. You have no control over if it's delivered, when it's delivered, the cost it's delivered, your availability at all. You have no control over those things. Zero. Not the first inkling of control. Now, I know there are people that make a hobby, a game out of driving around town trying to find gas that's 3 cents a gallon cheaper, and they feel like they've got control. That's anxiety. That's someone who recognizes that they're vulnerable and they're running around pretending they're in control of the price. Well, you're not. Shaving 5 cents a gallon off a gallon of gas is not evidence of control. It's evidence of being in a trap. That's something you think you have to do. What happens if there's no gas of any kind? We've had that recently, just because of the fires, electricity outages. And in parallel with that, there's another problem that's related, which is that we do not have infrastructure for non-car lifestyles. We don't provide infrastructure for pedestrians, like to cross over large roads that have multiple lanes. We don't provide bus services. We don't provide train services. We don't provide them for free. We don't provide them cheaply. Maybe you have a bus line in your neighborhood. Probably you don't. We make people dependent on cars or allow them to be dependent on cars, and then we don't even provide an alternative for the most part. So I ride a bicycle pretty much everywhere. And there are some places that I just can't ride a bicycle. The roads are too narrow. People drive too aggressively. The speed limit's too high. I have to wait a long time for the cars to pass so that I can venture out into the lane because there's no bike lane and the lanes are terrible narrow. And it's hard to even get around my house to get to any of the 4 points of the compass without running into something like that. Now, there are a lot of bike lane improvements, and that's great. And they're very aggressive about that, apparently. And so, early days, we'll see if we provide enough infrastructure for bicyclists, pedestrians, that kind of thing. But even if we do, the distances can still be a problem. And people who have the scenario I outlined a moment ago, where there's one kid over this direction, another kid that way, shopping over here, and then in a whole other direction to get to work. You may not be able to do that on a bicycle. Unless you manage to get your kids on bicycles and you feel great about that. Then they just go their separate ways. And that's at least maybe one problem you can solve, but maybe not. Maybe you can't solve that problem. Maybe that's also a predicament for you. Another way in which we are trapped is the JIT economy, just in time. So I talked about that extensively in the last video I did, the House of Cards. The JIT economy and JIT food production, manufacturing, a lot of the things that we need are manufactured and delivered just in time. There's no warehousing. You think that there's a warehouse full of food someplace and that the shelves will never be empty. Well, you're wrong. You're just wrong. There is not a warehouse full of food. There is a truck on the highway driving food here and there and around. And when it arrives at your store, then your store gets a delivery and then that truck leaves. If that truck doesn't show up, then there's nothing to put on the shelves. There's no warehouse in the back where all this food is stored that they're just going to trot out and put on the shelves, and that they can do that for a week or a month. That is not how it works. Now, a JIT economy and a JIT delivery system for food is highly technologically based. There are entire, server farms that are being used to calculate what's the best route for the food to be delivered, who needs it where, how much has to be delivered by this time of day tomorrow, and what is their inventory so we can pre-order for them. And it's all heavily technologically based, and it's a trap. If it ever breaks, then we have a massive, unsolvable predicament. No solution. There's no warehouse, and nobody knows where the food is. If that ever breaks, as we're seeing now with so-called supply chain issues, early days, we don't know if this is going to improve or not. Maybe this is the beginnings of the collapse of our JIT economy and manufacturing and food delivery systems. Along that same lines, your food is not created in your community. Just like there's not a warehouse, your food comes over vast distances, even entire countries, across borders. Your meats, your produce, fruits and vegetables that maybe don't even grow in our climate can still be delivered. Along with your food, traveling thousands of miles, if not tens of thousands, your water supply. Your water supply probably doesn't come from your community, and not all of it. And even if it did come from your community, maybe there's like there is in this town where I live. They pump out of the ground, but the pumping is not in my neighborhood. It's certainly not my backyard. I don't have a well, so there's a pumping station somewhere. They're pulling water out of the ground. If the water isn't being replaced faster than it's being pumped out, that's going to be a problem. So they're pumping water out of the ground. No one knows what's happening down there. No one's paying attention. They're distributing all this water in pipes. It comes in on my spigot. I turn the spigot, water flows out. That whole thing is a problem. It's a technological trap. And you need that to work. Same thing for your sewer removal. You flush your toilet, you never think about it again. Well, there's entire infrastructure that's hidden to you, completely invisible to you. Completely invisible. Managed by people that you've never met and will never know they even exist. Just to take away the waste that you just flush down the toilet. Take a shower, the water disappears. Wash your clothes, the water just disappears. It's like magic. Well, it's technology, a lot of it, very expensive. It was made once. You can only do this once. And after that, all these suburbs show up and all these people are reliant on this. And about all you can do with it at some point is just maintain it and hope it never breaks. There are a lot of people who are heavily reliant on a just-in-time, as-needed medical system. So people who are reliant on kidney dialysis, insulin treatments or deliveries, emergency medical care. As you get older, that becomes more important to you. But certainly, any kid can break an arm, and we're confident that it's fine because, we'll take them to the doctor. Doctor will look at it. Doctor will prescribe a medication. I'll pick it up at the CVS. It's always there. I just swipe my credit card and I walk out with my pills and I'm fine, right? And, if you're heavily into the medical system, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're at home and you've got COPD or something and you're on oxygen, there's an oxygen bottle. And as soon as it runs low, another one gets delivered. How does that happen? I don't know. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe you have an oxygen generator. What kind of technology is that? What's the maintenance problems? It runs on electricity. What if it ever breaks? Well, I'll just get another one. Really? Will you? Who's gonna take care of that for you? You're trapped. You are in a trap. And if you're reliant on that medical technology, or even just an occasional visit to the hospital for appendicitis or even to get your neck cracked by the chiropractor, how is that supposed to work?
Take a little break, honey. So you're getting up. Just get up. You can move the whole table up and talk.
All right. I'm still being mothered.
Isn't that nice?
Close the door. Thanks. A couple days ago, I kind of sprained my back a little bit, so she's wanting me not to sit, and that's probably prudent. Anywho, so it's important to recognize that all this JIT economy, consumer goods, offshore manufacturing, communications networks, cell phone networks, internet, cable, TV, even radio, AM and FM radio, all these things are dependent on technologies of their own. So mostly the things I just mentioned are reliant on electricity. But also the internet is a highly distributed network of a bunch of different providers, a bunch of different routers and servers. Someone has to maintain all that stuff. People have to maintain that stuff. It has to be installed, configured, supplied with electricity, supplied with cooling. It's not as resilient as you think. You turn your computer on, you connect to the Wi-Fi, you start browsing the internet. It's all magic. But I was a network engineer for a while, and I kind of understand how that thing is built, and I can tell you it's not that robust. And even if it is robust, it's reliant on constant delivery of electricity, most of which right now, by and large, is generated with fossil fuels. But even just maintaining these networks requires armies of people driving in trucks and vans and all this stuff into neighborhoods, out to server farms. They don't live in these places. They go where they have to go. Every time there's a big windstorm like we just had around here, 30,000 people ran out. They didn't have electricity after the windstorm. So, PG&E mobilizes an army of service technicians, and they get their trucks with their booms and their repair equipment, and they go out into these communities and they feverishly repair everything. But that's all fossil fuels. It is all of it. And all the deliveries to the PG&E yard for transformers and poles and equipment, and of course the men who don't live at the PG&E yard, they live in some suburb someplace, some 80 miles away. How do they get to work? Least of all, how do they get to the job site where they have to put up a bunch of poles and run wire? It's all fossil fuels, all of it. Plus the people, whatever they have to have. We're also completely reliant, and this is going to become a big problem. We're also completely reliant on money abstractions. So I've said several times in this video, you just go to the fast food place and swipe your credit card. You go to the Whole Foods and you swipe your credit card, and you go to the gas station and you swipe your credit card. Well, not only does the gas station have to have electricity and network connections, there has to be behind that an entire financial apparatus to process your credit card. Now, the service station, generally speaking, they still have a guy sitting behind a counter who can take your paper money if the credit card thing doesn't work. And, that definitely happens. Sometimes service stations have to shut down completely if they've lost their internet connection. They just, at least the self-service does have to shut down because, they can still take your money inside. But what if you don't travel with money? What if money seems like a risk to you? So you don't travel with $100 every day to fill up the tank of your car or truck. Well, okay, so that's a problem. We are reliant on these things. Your money is not stored in the mattress of your bed. Your money is stored in a bank. There are protections against banks failing and taking all your money, like they wanted to do in the 1929 financial crash. But it's all virtual. Can you get to your bank? Well, they give you money. Do they have money? They don't carry a lot of money. So we're not a cash-based society anymore. The banks don't carry a lot of money because it's a risk for them, of course. This makes them a target. And they don't like it, and they don't need to because everyone has credit cards and debit cards, and so long as all that works, you're fine. But you're still in a trap. It would be no different if the tiger in his grotto at the zoo had a little bell he could ring to summon a handler to whatever, wash the poop out of the cage or whatever. I just pooped. I don't like that. So I'm going to ring the bell. Someone comes and takes care of it. Okay. It doesn't matter if the tiger has a bell or simply has to wait for someone to fix that for him. He's still trapped. Someone still has to come, whether it's on demand or on a schedule. Someone still has to come and take care of that problem for him because he can't do it himself. And there's a lot of things you can't do for yourself. You cannot do. ATM machines. You can get to your cash anytime you want, right? Well, there's limits on how much you can take out of an ATM machine. They don't want to have a lot of cash floating around. If they're ATM box, automatic teller machines, ATM machine is redundant. They're automatic teller machines. There's a limit on how much you can withdraw each day. The limit is not that great. And if we had massive failures of the just-in-time economy, you might need a lot of money. So you go to the ATM machine, and a lot of people had the same thought. It's empty. Now what are you going to do? Go into the bank? Well, maybe they have money. Maybe they don't. Maybe your predicament is now well understood, that you've been living in a technological trap. This whole swipe with a credit card and magic happens is it's completely artificial, and you have no control over this. You are in a trap. You're trapped. You're trapped by all these gewgaws and gizmos. Now, I'm not anti-technology. I've done really well doing technology. I will continue to do technology. I will add more solar panels to my solar home. I will add more cameras to my surveillance system. I will, my wife is doing canning. We'll buy more canning equipment. We'll buy more jars. We'll, invest more in our gardening, more heirloom seeds and shovels and things like this. I'm not averse to technology. I use it constantly, but I understand it. I understand what it is. I understand that the reliance on this is a kind of a trap. I know that. I accept it. I'm working around it all the time, constantly. And I'm always keeping my head down, listening at the rails for an approaching disaster. When is this going to be done? Because I'm afraid that, with the coming climate crisis, as they like to call it, a lot of these technological traps are going to become binding, where you really are in a place that you cannot get out of. So there's a move afoot, ironically enough, to replace one kind of technology with another. Our reliance on fossil fuels, which is a technology, which is ubiquitous, which is invisible, which is always on. Our reliance on fossil fuels is already being perceived for the trap that it is. We have a problem with global heating and the associated climate change. This is a big problem. I'm not making that up. This is lethal. This is absolutely lethal. And I'm not the only one recognizing that. There's lots of people recognizing that this is a potentially, I have a gnat here, lethal problem. So they're looking for other technologies to substitute. Now, your car-dependent lifestyle can be substituted with an electric vehicle, just to pick one. So you can't. So people would say, well, it's unfair to say that living in the suburbs and being car-dependent is a technological trap because I can solve that with another technology. There you go. Right. Solution. So it's not a predicament. It's a problem, and there is a solution. I buy an EV, and I charge my EV every night, and maybe even my work charges my EV for free. Who knows? And I've solved my problem. Well, there are actually two predicaments that go along with that, and I'm gonna get to a moment to a new definition of what happens when you try to solve a problem with solutions that create their own problems, because that happens a lot. It actually has a special term for that. So you're going to solve your problem, your technological dependence on fossil fuels, by getting an EV. Fine. If you're an early adopter of that, you're probably good. There's enough charging stations at work for you to charge your EV. There's enough electricity available at home that when you get home and plug your EV in, it charges. And when you're an early adopter, that's not a big deal. Your added use, because of course, the energy you used to use came from fossil fuels. Now the energy you plan on using comes from electricity. That's new. That's a new demand on the electrical grid. And as long as it's just you, that's fine. You can solve your problem with that solution, And now you don't have a reliance on fossil fuels. But as everyone starts to think the same thought and perform the same solution for them, you start to run into additional problems. So what are the problems? We don't have enough manufacturing capacity to sell everyone an EV. They're really expensive. The battery technology and a lot of the other, like the motor technology, the computer technology that's in these things, is dependent on an entire JIT manufacturing and delivery economy that is showing cracks even today. General Motors, Ford Motors, they've had to limit the models they can even manufacture because they can't get chips for them. Or they've had to reduce the feature set of some of the models they would like to sell because they can't get the chips for some of the features. So when everybody starts jumping on this bandwagon of, okay, we're all going to have EVs, then suddenly the supply chain, if you will, that could provide the trickle, this tiny trickle of solutions for people who recognize that problem, that trickle of solutions is not adequate. And you end up, you can't electrify your entire rolling fleet. And even if you could, and everybody wants an EV for their commute, even if you could supply that, could you then also turn around and simultaneously in parallel manufacture an entire electric rolling fleet for all the semi-trucks? And how about all the tractors that work on the fields? All these things are fossil fuel dependent. And in fact, you may decide as a country that the limited availability of parts, chips, batteries, electronic components, rare earths for magnets and the motors, that these limited things, that when it was just a trickle, it was fine. But now that we're doing this whole hog electrification of all of our rolling fleets, it's not up to the task. So maybe we do some triage, and we make sure that things like delivery trucks can be electrified, so they and make sure that the delivery trucks have charging stations. Let's build all those first. Every truck stop now has multiple, 100 charging stations. And let's also make sure that our first responders, fire, the ambulances, they get prioritized. So a lot of the limited resources go into that. Oh, and while we're doing that, how about the trains and buses that transport people who don't even have vehicles or don't want to use them anymore? They're trying to get off of fossil fuel dependency. What about that infrastructure? We're going to electrify all that. So they may not get around to electrifying your commute. They simply may not. And you say, well, the market forces. Okay, there's market forces. The consumer rules. The consumer is king. But there's also strategic realities. And if governments sense that they are going to be going into a chaotic collapse if they don't prioritize critical infrastructure conversion, and all those words have meanings, okay? If they're going to get a societal collapse because they did not prioritize important critical infrastructure conversion, then they will do that. They will take their political hit, and they will not necessarily, for everybody, have an electric car for your daily commute. Likewise, the electric grid right now does not charge and operate our rolling fleet. If you're in a diesel truck and you need fuel, if you're in an 18-wheeler today and you need fuel, you go to the depot and you put the liquid fuel in the tank and you drive off. You're not using any electricity at all. And whatever electric grid went to that truck stop, it's sized proportionate to what the requirements are for a truck stop. And what is that? Lights, pumps for the fuel. That's maybe there's a restaurant, so maybe there's a kitchen and they have some electricity in the kitchen, refrigerant, freezers and things like that. Probably they're cooking with gas. So if they have to electrify a truck stop, they have to bring in huge substation to provide all the hundreds of thousands of amps for all of those charging stations to charge up all those trucks on demand. So where's that electricity coming from? Where's it coming from? And that's a lot of money to run that infrastructure out to every single truck stop in the country. That's like a war effort. That's like reorganizing entire industries for the war effort. Now we're not making cars anymore. Now we're making tanks, and the aviation industry isn't making, civilian jets anymore. It's making bombers, right? So those kinds of conversions of flipping your industry around to do something completely different is a massive undertaking. And electrifying every truck stop to give them 40 charging stations or 100 charging stations, because it takes a while to charge a truck, right? That's going to be a world-class effort. That's going to be like mobilizing for war. And do you think that they're going to mobilize all the resources needed to pull that off for critical infrastructure and simultaneously do that for you and your life in the suburbs? Your car requires huge amperage to charge in a reasonable amount of time. And it runs all night. And, the electrical grid kind of assumes that nighttime electricity usage goes down. Well, what if electricity usage never goes down? It's always maxed out during the day for lighting and cooking and cleaning, and then all night for charging all of these EVs that came home. So, someone comes along and says, well, we can solve this problem of our dependency on fossil fuels in the suburbs by just making sure that, there's lots of EVs and charging stations. You could say that. You can say those words. You can actually say those words and people hear that. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Everyone gets an EV. Everyone gets a charging station. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's fine. And just because you can say it doesn't mean you can make it happen. Doesn't mean the government will even allow it to happen. Because at the same time, you and your commute have to be electrified, and you need infrastructure to do that. Least of all, of course, the car itself. Where's that thing coming from? Who's building that for you? Probably it's coming from China, for God's sake. Do they seriously care about us? You think they're going to sell us the things we need when they're trying to do the exact same thing for themselves? Don't count on that. You just can't count on that happening. It's another type of trap. We're trapped in this enormous JIT global economy that's just, having some countries manufacture batteries, and some countries manufacture tires, and some countries manufacturing upholstery, and a different country manufacturing the chips, and yet another country manufacturing the motors, and yet another country. And you just really? You think all this is going to work? You think that they're going to continue to sell us all the crap that we need to bail ourselves out of this predicament? Well, they might. They might do it. But there's no guarantee they're going to do it. There's just no guarantee, and you can't make them do it. You can't make them do it. Now, this is the point where I'm going to introduce a new term. This is a real term. You can look this up. You can Google this, and Wikipedia will have a whole workup on this. And it's called a wicked problem. A wicked problem is a bit like another way of saying a predicament. A wicked problem as opposed to a regular problem, where you have to find the solution and implement the solution, whatever costs or downside the rest of the solution, you still have one. A wicked problem is a problem that admits of no solution, or that the set of solutions, possible solutions that might actually be applied, create a new situation, a new problem that's actually worse than the one you started with. Our reliance on fossil fuels is a wicked problem. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That's what this video is all about. It turns out in the year 2022 that our reliance on fossil fuels was a wicked problem. It was a wicked problem all along, not so much early on. We probably still could have, like, say, the 1960s or 1970s. We still maybe had enough wiggle room that we could have applied solutions early on and sent the entire U.S. and global economy down a different path. Maybe we could have done that. Today, I don't think so. Well, I don't think so. I'm a little bit worried. I think that we are now in the realm of a wicked problem. There is no solution. Now, the techno utopians will come along and say, well, that's defeatist. That's that's not realistic. Of course there's a solution. There has to be a solution. Everybody starts out saying that. Well, we're smart. We invented the telephone. We invented radar. We can solve this problem. It's just an engineering problem. No, it isn't just an engineering problem. It's a trap. When you're in a hole, you're supposed to stop digging. When you find yourself in a hole and you're not sure you can get out, you're supposed to stop digging. You have to do something very different in that situation. And when someone comes along and says, well, we'll just apply a technological fix to this and we'll solve the problem. Well, if this was a regular problem, then your solution might work. Maybe it would require a lot of money, a lot of engineering, a lot of global cooperation. Maybe your situation would change with all that. But it's also possible that there is no solution. The example I just gave for people living in suburbs that are car dependent, you think there's a solution to that you'll just give everybody or buy everybody, sell everybody an electric vehicle. And maybe you don't. Maybe the elites get their electric vehicles first. And that's fine, right? They're happy. They got their electric vehicles. They don't care what happens to anybody else. And then all of a sudden there's an entire underclass of people who might even start with upper middle class people who didn't get on the list, who didn't make the list. Now you have another kind of problem. You have inequality. You have people who can do anything they want in their electric car, and there's charging stations plenty, and maybe their house individually they have, I don't know, enough solar, enough battery technology, nuclear reactors, small modular nuclear reactors. Who knows what these people are going to be able to get for themselves? And they're fine. And no one else is. And they continue down the road doing things as they have always done them, secure in the knowledge that they can solve their problem. And not caring particularly if you can solve your problem. So now we created a new problem. We solved the problem for the elites. We did not solve it for everybody. And now we have a new problem, which is inequality and resentment and class resentment, right? And injustice. We have a lot of that right now. Well, just imagine that only the 1% get to have a personal car and everybody else is having to figure out another way of doing things. Just imagine how that's going to work out. It's not going to work out. You can't. You just can't. These people are trapped. They're trapped in the suburbs. They're trapped in their lifestyle choices. They're trapped with everything being far away. They're trapped in a just-in-time economy. They're trapped in a just-in-time food delivery system. Everything they have was dependent on those fossil fuels. And as soon as that dries up, they start scrambling around trying to replace that in their lives. And it turns out that even if they were in line to get an EV and they got their EV, maybe the electric grid can't suddenly doesn't run reliably enough to charge everybody's car. The elites are getting the electricity. The people who had the money and the wherewithal got the electricity. That's being delivered, and everybody else is in the brownout zone. Another word for that is a sacrifice zone. We already have sacrifice zones. Food deserts, communities that don't have enough money to, afford to, to buy the $300 worth of groceries every time you go to the store, which is what it is now. And they just live on EBT, and they go to the Mickey D's and they swipe their EBT card and they get a burger, and that's how they eat that day. And these become food deserts because people don't have the $300 to plop down on a shopping cart full of food. Or they do for, once a month, and then they don't after that. Food desert. All you have is fast food. Well, we have that now. So there's evidence that the elites seriously don't care. They're not going to save you. And if you're a poor person right now living in one of these communities that's a food desert, you understand how that is. You understand what that looks like. Well, if you're a suburbanite driving every day 50 miles to get anything done, consuming 10 gallons of gas, $50 a tank every single day to get anything done, well, this is going to be new for you. You're not ready for this. And it was one thing when it was the poor people in a trap. What's it going to look like when it's the middle class and upper middle class people in a trap? How's that supposed to work out? I don't know. I really don't know. I just don't know how that works out. We are, I say this a lot, I'll say it again. We are sleepwalking into a disaster. We are sleepwalking into a disaster. We're going into a blind alley and we're sleepwalking. We're going to get to a point where we can't go any further and we're going to wake up. We're going to hit the end of the alley. What just happened? Where am I? How did I get here? I can't go forward. I can't go left. I can't go right. I turn around. I can't go back anymore. Okay. We're going to wake up at the end of a blind alley, having walked the entire length of that thing. And when we get there, we get to the end and we start looking around, scrambling around for a solution to our problem, we're going to find out there isn't one. And when you find out there's not a solution to your problem, then, then you're going to understand what a wicked problem is. Techno-utopianism right now is exceedingly dangerous. For people to trot out the EV solution and the solar roof solution and the hydrogen economy solution and the nuclear solution and all this, and the batteries and the rare earth element motors and all this stuff, when they start trotting this stuff out, the internet's going to solve our problems. When they start trotting this stuff out and saying, well, we'll just solve one technological trap with another technology, then, my only response to that is, no, you're not. I mean, you'll do enough of that. They'll do enough of that for you to keep you walking in your sleepwalk, to keep you going down that alley. And to give them credit, governments, corporations, spiritual leaders, whoever they are, to give them credit, they might even be thinking that before you get to the end of that alley and bump up against the brick wall that's always been there, they may be thinking, to their credit, well, we'll solve the problem for them. We'll just keep them walking forward, just keep them going. Don't disturb them. It's not good. They're fragile and they'll storm the Capitol if we do anything. Okay? They'll bring down the government. They'll roll out all the guns and shoot all the politicians if we disturb them. So let's just keep them walking, one foot in front of the other. And before they get to the end, we'll do some Deus Ex Machina, right? Deus Ex Machina, God falls out of the sky, solves the problem, everyone holds hands and sings Kumbaya. That might be their actual plan. That's not much of a plan. That there's going to be a miracle at the end, that something brilliant is going to happen, and all of a sudden everyone's problem is solved. Therefore, it would just needed a miracle. I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I'm enough of a technologist, and I've been doing technology long enough. And I've been watching, my communities and reading the signs and collecting the data, and I can tell you, I don't think this is happening. They're not having that conversation. They are not making those steps. They are not teaching people what to do. We are like that tiger in that cage, and they're keeping us there. And they're not, and no one tells the tiger that the zoo is shutting down. And no one tells the tiger that the power failed and that the workers can't even come to work. No one tells the tigers in the Moscow Zoo that the entire Russian economy has collapsed. The Soviet Union is finished. And now you're going to have to feed yourself because no one's coming to work anymore, right? No one tells the tiger this. The tiger just goes along. What else can it do? Tiger just goes along, doing the best it can with what little it's got, and it crosses its paws in the hopes that tomorrow is as good as today. And that's what's happening to people, humans in the world right now. Well, the entire industrialized world is in a trap. Everybody who is in a position to listen to this video in the year 2022 is in a technological trap. you are trapped. It's likely that people will remain trapped for years after this recording, but it is unlikely that will be the case forever. Unlikely. Because I don't think this thing they've built, this house of cards, can actually be sustained. I think it's coming down. Now, I talk occasionally, I guess mostly my wife and I talk about this. I may not have done a video on this, but the only distinction I make as I think about how this resolves itself over time, the only distinction I make is between two types of demolition, a controlled demolition and an uncontrolled demolition. We're going to get a demolition. You've seen them bring buildings down. That's a demolition. You demolish a building. You don't want that building there anymore. You bring in the specialists. They put charges in that building and they bring that building down. That's a controlled demolition. An uncontrolled demolition is you let the building sit there until it rots, and one day it collapses on its own. It falls over. It collapses when there's somebody inside of it. All terrible things happen with an uncontrolled demolition. No planning, no concern for public health or the environment. You just let things go. So that's what we're going into. We are going to have one of two types of demolition. When they pull out the rug of fossil fuels that's supporting this entire house of cards, when they do that, as they must, because they must leave it in the ground. When they do that, and I don't know who does it or how they do it or when they do it, but when they do that, the demolition begins. Now, if we wanted to get ahead of that day, we could start deciding in advance using what resources we have and our political and decision-making processes. We could say, against the day when the demolition begins in earnest, we want to prepare in the following ways. We're going to electrify our first responders. We're going to have a community-based electricity. We're going to make sure that homes have solar panels and batteries. We're going to make sure we get electric vehicles into the hands of enough people. And for the people who don't have electric vehicles, we want to make sure that they have some other means of survival. That the kids don't have to go 5 miles to a school. We create local schools, small schools. We downsize. We create local community gardens for food availability. Well, it doesn't have to be a lot of food. It doesn't have to be mangoes, but we have to have some food, right? Whatever vegetables your climate can support. And if your climate is too far north that you can't support that, wow. So now what do? Okay, that's a generational project. Finding out how to feed people in northern climates. I can tell you, if you live in northern Canada and Alaska or Scandinavian countries, the way they used to feed themselves was they went to sea and they caught fish and they caught mammals, sea mammals, and they ate them. They ate meat, by and large. They would eat the vegetables. They would eat the food out of the caribou stomach if they wanted vegetables, because they were eating, whatever little scraps of stuff they could find on the ground to eat. And, after it sat in their stomach, maybe it's edible for humans. They didn't grow wheat. They didn't have orchards. They didn't have row crops. They didn't have anything like that at all in northern climates. So what's going to happen to these people? Do they become fishermen again? Do they start hunting seals and whales? Do we even have seals and whales anymore? Are there enough seals and whales to support, the hundreds of millions of people that live north of and near the Arctic Circle? Well, if we don't have enough resources in the sea to feed the hundreds of millions of people who live at and above and around the Arctic Circle, then what do we do with those people? In a controlled demolition, you'd have a plan for that. You'd be relocating people. You'd be telling them. You'd be honest with them. You'd be honest with them. And you would tell them the place you are living and the way you are living here is not sustainable. And I don't mean green sustainability and hippie nonsense. I mean, there's not enough sunlight to grow the food you are currently eating. All your food is being imported. A lot of it just in time to go on the shelves. And you can't, without fossil fuels to make that happen, you can't survive here. Now, we have a solution. We're going to electrify the rolling fleet of delivery vehicles. We're going to have treaties with countries further south of us to deliver food. And you can continue to live here because we have an electrified fleet of cargo vessels. We have an electrified fleet of delivery trucks. And we're going to send some kind of food, maybe not the richness you're enjoying now, but some kind of food to your supermarket so you can continue to go there and you don't have to go hunt seals and whales. But that's a controlled demolition. You deliberately decide you're going to do this. You tell people what you're doing. You convince them it's necessary. Then you do it. You spend the money. You sacrifice. You do triage. We're going to fund this and we're not going to fund that as a result. You make these decisions. You sell it to the people. You make the people understand. You talk to them like adults. And then you do the painful thing. That's a controlled demolition. You're going to tear it down and rebuild it in a way that will work without fossil fuels. Or you get an uncontrolled demolition. What's that look like? It means the stores run out of food and no one knows where the food is and the food never arrives or it arrives after 3 months. And then people are starving to death and there's no electricity and they're freezing to death. And now they're rioting and now they're setting fire to the government buildings and now they're killing each other and now they're eating each other. I mean, that's an uncontrolled demolition. That's what an uncontrolled demolition looks like. When you just sleepwalk down an alley until you bump into the brick wall at the end. And at that point, you're not solving your problems anymore. You're seriously in a wicked problem. You can't go left. You can't go right. You can't go forward. You got nothing. You got no plan. No answer to any question that doesn't involve dying. That's an uncontrolled demolition. And we are sleepwalking right now into an uncontrolled demolition. We are trapped. We are in an alley. We are sleepwalking down this alley right into a brick wall. And at that point, the jig is up. And our politicians are so corrupt and so crooked and so focused on their own election cycle and their influence and their power and getting money from corporations and all this stuff. And I'm not saying this because I'm a wild-eyed anarchist. It's because it's true. And they're not going to do anything for you or me. And if you live in the year 2032 and you're watching this video, you're looking back and you're saying, yeah, that's right, they didn't. And he was right about that uncontrolled demolition. We just walked down that alley and no one said boo about anything. And we woke up with our face against a brick wall. We woke up from our beautiful dream and a beautiful life and swiping credit cards and just-in-time deliveries. And we got to the end of the alley and we woke up and it was like, oh, I guess that is over. That was a thing, but now it's not. And if you're living in the year 2032 and there's still internet and there's still YouTube and you caught this video 10 years after I recorded it, you know what happened. I'm guessing, but So what was it? What was it? You tell me. There were two options we had. A controlled or an uncontrolled demolition. So what did we do? You tell me. My guess is, based upon what I'm seeing, hearing, based upon data I'm collecting from politicians and corporations and leaders of all kinds at every level of government, is we're going to sleepwalk right into the end of the alley. We are opting for the default behavior, which is an uncontrolled demolition. That's what you get by default. You do not get a controlled demolition by default because that requires planning and truth speaking and painful decisions and triage and giving up over here to have over there. We're not doing that. So we're going to get the default. It's going to be ugly. Now, a controlled demolition is also going to be ugly. I don't want to pretend that that's not true. I am not going to say that's not true. It's going to be a bloodletting. Any way that we get off of fossil fuels, the consequences is going to be horrific, horrific, absolutely a nightmare. Either way we take, it's going to be a nightmare. So if people are fearful of selecting a course that requires you to do painful things, then they'll just go along hoping for the best until the bad thing happens. And the bad thing will happen to them. And this is where you get back to, people have a tendency to cling to what they have now, even if it's a bad solution, rather than take a chance on something that, might be an improvement. They'll cling to a bit of driftwood rather than try to swim to shore. That's how people are. Everyone's that way. I'm that way. You're that way. Well, if you're in the year 2032 and you're watching this video, maybe you're not that way. Maybe you've learned that it's really, 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 really super important to be honest with yourself. Just to admit the truth, just to not fight it. Don't have it be a conspiracy. Don't have it be communism or Marxism. It's not a shadowy cabal of elites trying to install a one world government. It didn't try to be any of that. By the year 2032, you know what happened. You know what happened. And it wasn't any of those things. It was just individuals, governments, corporations, everybody together, holding hands, sleepwalking into an uncontrolled demolition. That's my actual expectation, because that is the default. That is what you're going to get if you never honestly assess your situation. You're going to get an uncontrolled demolition. And that's the outcome of the technology trap. We're very comfortable. It's very familiar. We don't even understand it. It's virtually invisible to us. It always works. And when it doesn't work, there's always someone to fix it. And, we like that. And it works. And it's worked for decades now. And no one wants to release that and swim to shore. They don't want to do that. So they won't. They won't. It's not easy to have this conversation. It's really not easy to have this. When I come away from these videos and I think about what I just said, it's like, what? Why? What am I supposed to do? I don't even know. Why do I even do this? I guess I do this because it's therapy for me. I have seen the future. It's ugly. Oh man, it is so ugly. Someone in 2032, 10 years from now, will be able to tell me how ugly it got. That I didn't even know the half of it. That I'm back in 2022 with all my internet and my truck and my solar panels, living like a king. You didn't understand half of what was coming. You didn't predict the cannibalism. You didn't predict the wacky religions. You didn't predict the uncontrolled demolition of democracies and every nation that ever had one. 2022, you didn't know jack. Stop pretending you knew what you were talking about. You didn't know anything. Well, except that bit about uncontrolled demolition and the technology trap. That was true. Yeah, I got that part right. In 2032, they'll give me credit for getting that part right. But the rest of it, you didn't know anything. Completely clueless. And I admit to that. I'm hoping for the best, just like everybody else. I guess I'm sleepwalking into the future, just like everybody else. We're all on the same train. We're all on the same Titanic. And I don't know. It's been a nice ride, right? It's been a great ride. But it was always a trap. It was always a trap, and we never got free of it. We didn't when we could have. We're not doing it now. And I think future generations will look back and say, yeah, that there was never anything they could do. Maybe they'll give us some credit for trying. I don't know. So I probably have couple more videos to do in this series, The Age of Chaos. I'm not sure what the next one's going to be. Right now, I can't even think about it. Right now, I just don't have the spirit to deal with it. Good luck, everybody. God bless you.